it's not celebration assembly. It feels a bit like that to me. This is what I'm used to doing in this way, but we're really glad you can join us today. We are thrilled to be able to share with you our plans and how we come to these plans for welcoming our children back more widely on Monday. I'm just going to let you know some things before I pass on. We are going to be recording tonight's meeting, but it will only record school staff. So don't worry about that. It'll only be us that's being recorded. We'd also like to invite you through the session this evening to ask questions. So if you have a question and you'd like to ask it of us, please use the chat facility and you'll be able to send the question to me, and we'll share those at the end of the evening. And then also, if we have time, we'll open the floor. So you'll be able to ask if anything else pops up then as a follow on from those as well. So hopefully we'll have time to do that later on. So tonight, we're going to start with John Coxhead, who's going to start the evening off for us, and then you'll hear from me and Chris Lawson as well today. Okay. John, I haven't gone over again, have I? You haven't muted me yet?
Wonderful.
Okay.
Perfect. No, great. Kept the time. Thank you, Mrs. Watts. Thank you, Natalie. So basically, massive thanks to everyone for coming along. I know lots of you have been on Zoom all day, so impressive Zoom stamina if you're still here for another session in the evening. Our roadmap for the next 30 minutes is this. We are going to be fairly brief. And we really want to try and ring fence some time for Q&A at the end. So please do use that chat to post some questions. We might just open the floor up more generally as well, because we want this to be as interactive as possible. Otherwise, we could have just pre-recorded it and put it online for you all. So we'll start with a quick introduction to the strategy, which I'll talk through. Then we've got kind of 2 focused strategy insights there as well. Okay. So I want to start off by just talking a little bit about the name for this, because we've been really deliberate in naming this Shining Even Brighter. And we've also been really deliberate in avoiding kind of terminology like catch-up curriculum or recovery program, which kind of seems to be the dominant discourse in the media and in terms of what government are saying. And we've kind of done this because we feel that kind of catch-up narrative almost implies to some extent that the last few months have been a write-off. Everyone's now really behind in their developments. And of course, there are going to be challenges when pupils come back. But as a school, and obviously our strategy is always about supporting every child to flourish in every sense, to let their light shine, whether that's academically, socially, emotionally, spiritually. If we ask ourselves, have our children let their light shine in the past few months? Yes, absolutely they have. It's been a challenging time for us all, but in many ways in that we've really seen the best of our pupils and our children, and we want to celebrate that, and we want to support them to shine even brighter when they come back to school. So that will be our message to the children when they come back. Wow, you know, we're so impressed with what you've achieved in the past few months, the resilience you've shown, the optimism, the positivity, and now let's shine even brighter. So that's kind of the reason for that. And there are other problems with the catch-up kind of narrative. You may have seen some press coverage about when last week the British Psychological Society were warning the government that its kind of constant use of the kind of catch-up language is going to potentially produce kind of unnecessary psychological pressure for children. And actually that will hinder their learning rather than support them to learn quickly when they come back to school. Of course, what we want for them all. And the other thing is it kind of, if we're not careful, can create a sense of panic because again, this idea that we're behind, there's loads to do. If we're not careful and that's not carefully managed, that again, that can lead to panic, which again, is not a context for effective learning. So that's kind of the story behind our project strategy. Our process, I'm not going to bore you too much with this, but we started back in late January, kind of the top of this cycle. This is the model we've followed with this. Rather than just assuming that everyone's going to be a couple of months behind in academically, social development or whatever, we've tried to really unpick what the problem is and try and anticipate what challenges we're going to see when pupils come back. So we've looked at lots of data that will help us gain that insight. We've looked at our own internal assessment data from the end of last term. We've looked at information you've shared with us via the parent survey, so thank you for that, about how your child's been getting on at home. We've looked at things like engagement rates with different lessons that have been put online, so we know which curriculum areas have had lots of engagement, which have had less so. And again, that helps us to anticipate challenges when we return to school. And that's enabled us to gain a fairly good understanding, we feel, of where we can anticipate some problems and therefore identify clear priorities and objectives. And that's what hopefully you'll have seen on the website. So I'm not going to read through those objectives and talk about those in depth now, because that's all there for you to look at and read through in your own time online. So please do that. And then kind of since that then led in that explore phase before the half term to the production of our strategy. And then since the half term, we've been preparing to deliver that strategy. So we've been training staff in terms of relevant training they need. We're trying to ensure all stakeholders are informed and they know what the plan is. So that's partly why we're doing this tonight, so that you are aware of what's going on. And that's going to be a key part of our approach, keeping you informed throughout. And we've also collaborated with other schools. Back on Monday, myself and Natalie actually hosted an event through our Teaching School Alliance. We had 14 primary schools come along to collaborate on these return to school plans. I'll brag for a second. They were a bit blown away by how far we've got with ours, which was quite encouraging to hear. But it was really good for us as well to learn from them and to find out where they were planning to focus their energy as well. And that helped, again, reshape some of the things that we're doing. So all of this led to our strategy, which you may have seen on the website, and it looks like this. Now, there are 3 tiers here. So it's split in 3 tiers. So tier 1 is teaching. So what we're doing in the classroom, whole class, quality first teaching. Tier 2 is targeted academic support that complements and builds on tier 1. These are not sort of distinct areas, they all very much overlap. There's all sorts of things listed under there you can look at. And then tier 3 is wider strategies as well. Now, there's no rank order, no one tier is more important than the other. As I say, they overlap and they connect to form the whole, which is what that kind of diagram in the center is all about. Again, we're not going to go through all of this evening and talk through every single action in depth, but we thought we'd give you an insight into 2 parts of this strategy in particular. So we're focusing in on tier 1. And so Chris Lawson, our maths lead, a bit later on, will talk through what we're going to do in maths, any tweaks we'll make to our current maths offer when pupils return. Natalie Watts, who amongst everything else she does is also our English lead, is going to talk through the same for English. And then there'll be that time for the Q&A. The one thing I do want to draw your attention to in this, before we move on, are these things down here. They're kind of in there in the wider strategies, but actually these are going to be absolutely central to what we do. We're going to continue to prioritize relationships with pupils, and we're going to quickly embed routines, because we really believe that getting back to normality in terms of the routine and structure of school is what's going to support a lot of pupils to kind of feel better again and get back into to learning quickly and feeling well supported and growing socially and all that sort of thing. And obviously that, that includes having really high expectations of them. That includes in delivering our normal challenging curriculum. Yes, there'll be the nurture elements of the relationships, but that'll be balanced with really high expectations around behavior as always, and kind of effort and approach in lessons and things. Last thing I want to mention here, the last bullet point on tier 2 is about engaging with you as parents. And so our next parents' evening, which we're going to schedule for around 4 or 5 weeks after the return date, and there'll be some information soon about that, we're going to share with you some really specific targets for your child at that point, things we've picked up on since they've come back to school so that you can continue to support them at home in really focused ways. So that won't be us just saying, go on rock stars or whatever, because that's good for everyone all the time. So that's a constant message of, yes, use tools like that. These will be more specific things tailored to your child. Natalie, over to you.
Thank you. Right, my turn. Oh, sorry, I'm way back. There we go. Okay, so I'm going to talk to you about English, as John said, and our approach and how we're coming to that over the next few weeks as well. To reiterate some of the things that have been said, we are very consciously avoiding that catch-up word, that deficit model. What we want to do is acknowledge the learning, the successes that children have experienced both before Christmas and also in their time in learning at home. But we are very clearly ensuring there's a focus on the most important or essential aspects of learning, in particular year groups, in particular areas, that there's a clarity in that. And so that we are building on and developing core knowledge and skills that we've identified, making sure that we ensure those high expectations from our children and from our staff in supporting our children. So that's where we're coming from, which supports our wider strategy, particularly in English. That's been our thought process also. underpinning that approach really is this phrase I'm using, go slow to go fast. Now, that doesn't mean we're slowing down children's learning. It doesn't mean we want them to go slowly. What it means is we have to be really careful about making sure we are mastering and focusing on those core skills that children need, which will then enable them to progress at pace again as well. So this idea of catching up quickly and just doing everything quickly, covering everything quickly, doesn't help our children. It doesn't help them as they move on to the next phases within primary school or even into secondary school. We need them to have secured the core things that we've identified so that they can then build on that learning quickly as they continue to move on in their educational journey as well. I will say at this point as well, our approaches in this are underpinned by research. We've thought carefully, we've read widely, we've chosen carefully our approaches, and we know there's proven evidence of their work in our school, because these are things we're building on successes within our school, but also in schools across our alliance and wider, as well as we've done that background thinking and reading into the approaches that we're going to employ. So I'll talk to you about reading first. And again, these are very broad, very speaking. I'm not going into loads of detail here. I'm conscious of time, but I'm giving you a good understanding, I hope, of what we'll be doing with our children. Essentially, for our youngest pupils, we cannot escape that we are going to be focusing on phonics and reading accurately for our younger readers and for those children who need that support. That high focus on that is going to be there. We do that very well as a school anyway, I feel, but we're going to make sure that that is well targeted, well supported, and children get that in their whole class teaching, but also in the targeted academic support, and that's dealt with really, really well. Later, and as they develop those reading skills, and in Key Stage 2, we are going to be employing a proven repeated reading approach. This approach enables us to focus with the children on ensuring that they are reading challenging texts. They will be challenging, but that's where we know the biggest gains in learning come. We'll be focusing on accuracy, making sure children are reading accurately, that they are reading at an appropriate speed so that it's reflecting oral language, and the prosody and the tune of the words that they're reading sounds like oral language. All of those things to come together to make sure the children are reading fluently. We know that fluency is highly important in enabling children to then delve deeper into text and explore meaning and really grapple with the complexities of text there. So we're going to be really focusing on that as well. It will, of course, that program will have vocabulary teaching built in, probably through direct instruction. And we know that's essential as well for children's learning, particularly as they go on into secondary as well. So all that vocabulary teaching we're able to do now is really important. And this repeated reading is great for spelling and writing as well. So it helps our children develop their orthographic mapping skills, which maps words and patterns into their brain. And when it comes to writing as well, it supports them, but it also, supports reading more widely and in more challenging texts as well. And of course, that's our focus. We will be engaging with text and meaning, and what we traditionally perhaps would call comprehension. We will be doing that, but we know that doesn't happen well, and it doesn't happen effectively unless children have that fluency in their reading, and that's really strong. So we'll be monitoring it and developing that with our children over a period. In writing, you probably know, particularly if you've been doing this at home, that we use Talk for Writing. Writing is one of the most cognitive demanding tasks we ask our children to do, and it's one of the reasons why we choose Talk for Writing. Talk for Writing helps our children to internalize grammar structures and to internalize those things, so that when they come to write, it reduces the cognitive demand for them. However, we are going to be making a short-term change to that. We're going to be using a tighter, more focused teaching structure. We will be prioritizing, again, those key skills, that knowledge and understanding, so that we know children have mastered it, have embedded it, so they can progress at pace as they move through the phases of their education as well. We've identified those core skills in each year group, what we think is particularly essential to ensure children have those skills ready and at their fingertips before they move on, and that's where our focus will be. Handwriting and spelling will be included. Automaticity in handwriting and spelling reduces cognitive load for our children as they write. So we know those are really essential, and we will be giving those the time and energy they need. Particularly year groups will have those more than others. Obviously in year 1 and year 2 or reception, they're going to be focused on handwriting a lot more than year 6, because hopefully those skills are there, but that will be balanced out across the year groups as well, with spelling in there too. One of the other things we're doing is exploiting interdisciplinary literacy. So in our English lessons, if we're focusing on a core skill like conjunctions or a positives or other particular skills, we're going to seek opportunities in science, in geography, in history to come back to those, to rehearse them, to practice, to make sure that we are mastering those with our children, and increasing challenge in other areas so they're using them across the curriculum too. And through that program, we feel very strongly that our children will make good progress in their learning, will be challenged, will be supported, and will be able to move on at the right pace so that they are ready for the next phases of their learning. The other thing I just wanted to add that sort of builds on to what John said earlier was this idea of partnership. You will be getting quite specific targets for your children or areas that we think you could help with. If we think there's an opportunity for you to be supporting them, or something very specific that we can give you, not just go on Spelling Shed, but maybe a list of words or a particular thing that they need to work on, we'd like to share that with you and make sure that partnership in learning is really strong so that you feel involved, we're supported, and we're giving our children the best opportunities to learn and succeed together. And in the meantime, the thing I always say more than ever is read, and talk about words. And we know those things have a huge impact on our children and their outcomes across the board, actually. So that's English. In a nutshell, I've not timed myself, so I don't know how cross Chris is with me yet. Have I gone over too much? Have I been under? Have I given you extra minutes? I don't know, Chris.
No, I'm just really proud. I'm really proud. Hi everyone, and welcome to this session just looking quickly at maths and how we're going to respond in the coming weeks. So the first thing just to point out here is that we're going to be making sure that quality first teaching is at the heart of our response. And by this we mean using responsive teaching, which is based upon prior knowledge. So there's no point teaching a child something if they already know it. It's wasted time, and we haven't got time to waste. Although we're not panicking or stressing, we know every minute counts. And so as a result, we're going to be making sure that we make use of assessment. In particular, White Rose, which is our unit or our teaching block, which we use, our scheme of work. And it has these wonderful little block assessments at the end. And I tentatively use that word assessment. We package it wonderfully to the children as mini quizzes, although some of them do see straight through it. But at the same time, we look at assessment as this idea of where are they now and where do we need to get them to? And so we'll be using these to underpin our teaching and learning at the very beginning of our units, so that no time is wasted, but also we can, if there is a gap in knowledge for that whole cohort or a significant number of a cohort, we in the previous year's curriculum, for whatever reason, we can patch that and we can support that through high quality teaching and learning. The second aspect here is this idea, as Mrs. Watts was mentioning, this core focus. So as well as our curriculum, which isn't changing, I want to make that really clear, we're going to continue in the way, in the trajectory which we were always planning on doing. We're just going to try and be as responsive as we can. We are on certain elements, we're going to go slow to be able to go fast. And you'll hear, hopefully you'll hear the children starting to say this as well. I think it'll become a bit of a motto. Guys, we're gonna go slow to go fast here. And what I mean by that is there's going to be certain focuses in our maths curriculum and our morning maths, those morning and afternoon sessions where the children do a little bit of maths, where they're going to be key focuses. And these are based around a document which was produced by the Department for Education back in September called the Ready to Progress criteria. And these were the things which maths specialists, including the NCTEM and maths body, who are very well reputable in the education sphere, came up with, that stated by the end of year 3, the children need to know these. By the end of year 4, they need to know these 5. And especially for our year 6s going off into secondary school, we're going to have a massive focus on making sure that they are secondary ready. And we can do that by using these ready to progress criteria to help. And there's lots of support materials for our teachers as well in this. The last thing that we're going to do is we're going to utilize and use assessment and technology to acquire and retrieve knowledge. So to gain knowledge in the first place, but then this idea of retrieval practice over a long period of time. And this is going to happen in Key Stage 1. And the teachers are going to use the normal teaching and learning strategies to do so. But into Key Stage 2, we're going to be using something called learning by questions, Shobi and Socrative, which is a quizzing app. to enable this to happen further. And don't panic when you see lots of numbers and colours, but this is just a really quick snapshot of this tool called Learning by Questions. Some children have already used it. If parents in year 4, they might have seen this in some of the remote sessions that we've done, and in year 5 as well. We've been trialling it in those 2 classes before rolling it out. And here is responsive teaching in the moment. And what I mean by that is these come up green and yellow and red, and then we can see trends within the class. We can pull data, and the children can see this as well. And we can pause and teach at that point. So it's really that high quality, live and responsive teaching and learning. And so those are the 3 elements which we're going to be focusing on with maths through the school over this next coming few weeks and into months. And we'll consistently tweak and assess our plan as we go to. So that's it from me, from maths, and back over to you, John.
Thanks, Chris. Excellent. Right, so this is the bit where we have tried to set some time aside for questions to keep this as interactive as possible. In the chat, you'll notice you can type a message to the host. You can pick which host you type a message to, me, Natalie, or Chris, doesn't really matter. And we'll pick up your question and answer that. Or if you want to just simply unmute yourself and ask a question, that's absolutely fine. And no problem at all if you'd prefer to do that. Whilst we're waiting for any questions to come through, and obviously do just unmute if you want to ask one out loud as well. I just thought we'd use this last minute or two to come back to this. I'm just going to mention 1 or 2 other things on here that we've not drawn a lot of attention to yet, because we've got time, we might as well. Hopefully a thread you'll see running through this is the 3 R's that we had as our kind of focus back in September. So when the pupils returned to school then, we spoke about responsive teaching, relationships and routines. And you'll hear from what Chris just said around maths, we're being really responsive to people's needs. We're doing that in English too, with the adjustments to our writing curriculum, for example. Relationships and routines will still be a core part of what we do. So that kind of, there is a connection with this to what we did in September as well. And also you can't quite see it on the screen share here, but you may have noticed this when you read the strategy yourself. In the bottom left, it says about continuing the full delivery of our challenging, broad and balanced curriculum across all subjects. I really want to emphasize and draw attention to that, because what we're not doing here at all is narrowing our curriculum to English and maths. They're the 2 insights we've kind of shared this evening, but they're not going to get any more curriculum time than they would normally. They're obviously priorities in our curriculum anyway, but we feel that part of our children enjoying life in all its fullness, which is the Church of England's vision for education, and letting their light shine, is having access to a challenging, broad, balanced curriculum. It's really important to us. So they will continue when they come back to do every subject on the national curriculum. And we've tried our best to keep that going while they've been at home. Obviously, it's difficult in some subjects to do it remotely, D and C, for example, but we are continuing the whole broad, balanced curriculum. So I want to really emphasize and stress that. And I think that will also support pupils to settle in as well and enjoy that. We've had a couple of questions come through. So I'm just going to respond to those. One is around, can we confirm if national tests at the end of Key Stage 2, which we all know as SATs, have been cancelled? Yes, they have. So there are no end of Key Stage 2 national assessments this year. Don't worry from a perspective as a Year 6 parent. That is more of a thing for schools, to be honest, anyway, to worry about at this stage. Obviously, what we're going to do is have careful transition with secondary schools to ensure they still get our, hopefully reliable teacher assessments. To inform our teacher assessments in school, we use standardized tests. So the ones we use at NTS assessments, they've been standardized with about 20,000 pupils nationally. So we use those too, and that will help us, again, pass on relevant information to secondary school to aid the pupils' transition. Obviously too, there's also our normal transition program in terms of nurture and support for pupils as they move into secondary. Obviously it's a massive time in there, massive change for them. For this cohort more than ever, with the disruption to learning in the last 2 years, how we prepare them for secondary is going to be really, really crucial and important. And so we'll share more information with you about that in due course, because it is something we're going to, but right now, the best thing we can do is get them back in and learning and working hard every single day, making the most of every minute in school to make as much progress as possible ahead of secondary. Natalie or Chris, do you want to add anything to that particular question while I just go through the next couple?
No.
No, I was going to say for Key Stage 1, I suppose the same thing. We would anticipate Key Stage 1 would have SATs, and that isn't going to happen. We have done some phonics assessments with children earlier in the year, and we'll give that information to parents as well as we continue to work on that. So that's all from there. Didn't it?
We have had, I know we've got one raised hand, so I'll come to you in a second. We've also got another question in the chat. And a few nice comments coming through too from people saying thank you, which is great. No, you're welcome. But I know, obviously we appreciate the partnership with parents too, and everything you're doing as well to support school is equally appreciated. Next question is, how will we address the differences between children's academic progress over lockdown? That's a really good question, because obviously then, we're conscious that as always, some pupils over the last 2 months will have made more progress than others. That's something we've looked really carefully at in terms of engagement data. It's something we've been thinking about in terms of what our last assessment showed us too. But what our teachers are great at, and what we'll be asking them to do as always, is to plan for and meet individual needs when the pupils return. And so diagnostic assessment, that means looking at what pupils can do when they come back, is going to be crucial. And then, as I said before, we're going to continue with a challenging curriculum. So if anything, we are going to assume they have continued to make progress and then work backwards from there. So all pupils will continue to get that challenge, if that makes sense. Natalie, do you want to add anything on that one in particular?
I was just going to say as well, we anticipate, we've talked through that in our more detailed plan that we've shared with staff and governors, in that there will be differences, there will be challenges that we can anticipate, there will also be things that we don't anticipate. So the idea of responsiveness is really important, and we do that naturally. Children join us, they have different experiences, and in maths they may be great one day at one thing, and then a week later in another topic or area they might not be great. That happens lots of times. We are used to responding to that, and we will use those skills. But what we do acknowledge is that we're going to have to be really reflective, really careful in our thinking, and be noticing. And this has been discussed with staff, and we've shared those messages very clearly with them as well. But the other thing we do anticipate is we can't anticipate everything. So just being mindful and open to that, and seeing those things, and employing all those strategies, and using the support of colleagues across school and our support staff as well to help us meet those needs. And if we spot anything that is concerning to us, we will of course talk to you, and those will be personal discussions that we will have with you should the need arise as well.
Exactly. This whole shining even brighter idea as well, part of our conversation around that was lots of pupils have made incredible progress in the last few months, whether in school or at home. And again, we're shining even brighter. We're building on that. We're not just writing this time off. We're very much building on what's happened. Joe McRae, hand is up. So Joe, do you want to unmute yourself and ask a question?
Yeah, sorry, I'm on my phone, so I can't be bothered attempting to type anything. As per usual, the questions that I started scrolling as you were going through were largely answered by the time you got to the end, so very well done, folks. My only query is there any scope in the timetable to put in additional organised physical activity? Because for the kids that have been largely ignored between 9 and 5 at home with parents who've been working from home, but with the exception of round about this week, really, by the time it's got to 5, it's been dark. So they've not then been able to get out supervised in order to get any physical activity. So if there was any scope to kind of put in organised physical activity, even if it was 20 minutes every day, in addition to that kind of once a week PE lesson, that would be amazing.
So the first thing, that's a fantastic point. The first thing is that we have to deliver 2 hours worth of PE each week. So that's on 2 days during the teaching week. And the other thing that I would say is, gratefully, with the way that the weather's hopefully turning, albeit be British weather, when we do have our lunch times as well, the children are really active during those lunch times. They run around and that might not be for everybody all the time, but especially when we get on that field. Anyway, just running in from the field when we shout for the whistle gets quite a few of them energized as well. So I think it's certainly something to look at, and something that we can certainly reflect on. I think one of the other aspects is utilizing those break times and lunch times to really sort of energize them, to make sure that we have music out on the playgrounds quite often, and the children end up doing their own little dance moves and things like that, to get them up and active as well. So maybe utilizing breaks and lunch times would be something as well to think about.
I was just going to say, I echo that, Joe, really. Actually, as a parent, I feel like my daughter has lost her little bit of activity. You know, I can see that in her myself. So I think that's a good point and well raised. And as Chris said, we will make sure those playtimes and things are fun and energized, and make sure the equipment and the games are out there. But that's something perhaps to look at. But how we can just increase, you know, I know particularly infants, they do sort of wake up and shake up. I'm not quite sure how year 6 would respond, but Mrs. Wainwright has had them bouncing balls and doing music things. So where we're building those opportunities, I think that's a good shout. Let's have a think about that a little bit more as well. Yeah.
There's been a few comments coming through on the chat, actually, people supporting that as well and saying that would be a great idea and things. So we've had a few people echoing that, which is great. So thank you for that. That's a really good suggestion. Next question is, with all children experiencing and responding to the last 12 months differently, how will we manage the learning and development of the younger children specifically, both those who may need extra support and those who need to be stretched? So it's almost similar to one of the questions we had around meeting pupils who made, and these questions came through at a similar time actually, pupils who made different progress over this time, but with specifically younger pupils in mind. And you know, we are conscious that pupils in year 1 have had this disruption to their first 2 years of primary school, and it's a massive disruption for everyone, but you know, we know that is a huge thing for them. Natalie, what do you want to say about that before?
I'd go back to our first point about, you know, we are anticipating that there is going to be a difference in experiences, in spread, in the level of support people have had for different reasons, who's been in school, who's been at home, who's had people working, all those things. We are anticipating and thinking about that. Our staff are prepared for that, and we will be managing our curriculum and our group work so that we can offer support and challenge to pupils who need it. And that will come in different ways, through either the way we target the learning in smaller steps for some children, or giving more freedom and flexibility to others, in the way we use our additional adults who we're blessed to have in school, and the way we support them, and by being flexible in our approaches to that. And so that will be our main responses, which we have to do. And we'll use those resources as well as we can. For some of our younger children, you might not know this yet, we've also got sort of forest school starting in year 1 when they return. A letter will go out about that later in the week. We're trying not to bombard you, but that will give them some opportunities, one, for being outside and being physical together, but also give teachers time to work in smaller groups. That happens naturally in reception as well, and we'll be working with our staff in year 2 to enable that to happen as we draw in our support staff from that. So we will be utilising every adult we have in school, every resource. To be fair, we planned a bit of this on the inset day before, you know, Mr. Johnston announced to us that we weren't coming back the next day. So, you know, we are prepared to use all our adults, all our resources, all our support to be able to provide the appropriate thing for the appropriate children as well. I don't know if I've missed anything, John.
Yeah, there's a few comments coming through there saying brilliant, thank you, and that sounds great. So that's good, thank you. One question is about, are we able to share any information regarding in school or home COVID testing? Well, there's a letter been drafted today.
But shall I just say that? Shall I just say it now so that you've heard it? And there is a letter.
You may as well. Yeah.
Yeah. So obviously our staff are testing twice a week. Tonight's test night for us all. We look forward to Wednesdays greatly. So tonight is test night for our staff. In terms of families who being able to access lateral flow testing twice a week, you can access that. It does not come through school. When I saw that on the television, I nearly cried because I didn't know where to put the boxes. Thankfully, I don't have to store the boxes. To be able to access that testing, you would go to a COVID test centre. I know one of our parents has done this recently, actually. You arrive, you tell them what you're there for, they send you off with some tests and off you pop, and you can manage those. You then report them. If you do a lateral flow test, you must report it online on the NHS website, and obviously you'd let us know if it was positive. If it's negative, we don't need any information, but it's positive, obviously we need to take action. So we'd need to do those. So it doesn't come from school, we don't distribute it, and children aren't being tested. That's the important thing as well. There's no need for primary children to be tested at the minute as well. But we will send out a letter, if maybe tonight, maybe tomorrow morning, it's ready to go. We just like to read them again before we send them. Okay.
Excellent. Last question which came through the chat, which I've just responded to, actually was about after school activity. I know we got onto physical activity before, and we have had a conversation in school about that from the summer term. So we just sort of phased approach in line with our risk assessment, how we manage that from the summer term onwards when weather's better and things, hopefully anyway. And also on top of that, there was a question about competitions between schools and sporting events in particular. We've not had the green light for that yet. It's just physical activity at our own school for now that we're talking about. But obviously we agree that would be lovely. And the sooner we can get back to that, the better, because pupils do love that and thrive off that. So, okay, that has brought me to the end of the questions in the chat. And we're also a bit after 5. So we're going to close it there. Obviously, everyone knows that you can get in touch with school anytime anyway, to ask further questions about this and to follow up. But yes, go on, Mrs. Watts.
Yeah, I can hear you now.
Can you hear me now? Yeah, thank you. I was doing that thing again where I'm sure they mute me on purpose, which wouldn't surprise me at all. They just hide the buttons from me. I was just going to say that we are hopeful that school swimming will be able to start as well for our Year 4 pupils. We're currently working on risk assessments and with our providers to do that. Obviously, as well, in all of these things, we're waiting on government on the next steps, on all of those things opening up, and we'll follow those, making sure our risk assessment fits as well. But there's, a little glimmer of school swimming in the future to look forward to as well. Okay.
Excellent. Thank you, everyone, for joining us. Have a nice evening, and we look forward to seeing you soon when you're dropping off at school.